If you've ever been mocked for how you look, this story is for you. It might remind you that the world sees your body, but God sees your heart. Before we go any deeper, please consider subscribing to this channel. We tell stories that awaken your spirit and remind you that even the forgotten are never forsaken. Like this video and share it with someone who's carrying silent pain. He was only 11. A normal school day until the teacher rolled out the scale. "Let's check everyone's health," she said with a smile. But for him, it wasn't about health, it was about humiliation. When he stepped on the scale, the numbers flashed in red. And then, the laughter. Loud, cruel, echoing like knives in his ears. One boy shouted from the back of the class, "It's gonna break! Look at him!" Another one snapped a photo. The teacher didn't stop them. She chuckled and said, "All right, let's move on." But he couldn't move. His heart had already shattered. That night, he cried into his pillow in silence because strong boys don't cry out loud, and that was the first time. He wondered if he was a mistake. There's something cruel about mirrors. They don't lie. And for him, that was the problem. Every morning before school, he'd stand in front of one, but not to admire, to cover. He pulled his shirt down over his stomach, turned sideways, hoped today it would look smaller, but it never did. By 14, he weighed over 260 pounds. And by then he had developed a routine: avoid mirrors, avoid cameras, avoid eye contact, because every time he looked at his reflection, he saw failure. Not just fat, he saw shame, he saw rejection, he saw someone even he didn't want to be. If you've ever looked in the mirror and felt pain instead of pride, comment "I understand" below. You're not alone. And this story isn't over. He had always hoped that home would be his safe place. That when the world laughed, mocked, or ignored him, his mother would wrap him in words that healed. But one afternoon, that illusion shattered. He had just come home from school, his shirt torn, his eyes red. A group of boys had pushed him, called him fat garbage, and ripped his backpack. He stood in the kitchen, trembling, tears barely held back. His mother looked at him and sighed. Maybe if you didn't eat so much, they'd stop. He froze. His lips parted slightly, waiting for her to say she was joking, but she wasn't. She turned back to the stove. No hug, no comfort. Just silence. And in that moment, he realized that sometimes even love turns its back. That night, he didn't eat dinner, but not because he wanted to lose weight. He just didn't want to feel anything. People thought he was addicted to food. What they didn't understand was that food was the only thing that never judged him. It never called him names. Never rolled its eyes, never walked away. It welcomed him. It numbed the shame. It filled the silence. By the time he turned 16, he had memorized every fast food menu in town. He knew which drive-thrus had staff that wouldn't stare. He knew which times of night were quietest. He wasn't eating for taste anymore. He was eating to feel full of something. Anything, but nothing satisfied. Not the fries, not the cake, not the fifth soda. Because the hunger inside him wasn't in his stomach. It was in his soul, and no meal could silence that ache. People thought he was addicted to food. What they didn't understand was that food was the only thing that never judged him. It never called him names, never rolled its eyes, never walked away. It welcomed him. It numbed the shame. It filled the silence. By the time he turned 16, he had memorized every fast food menu in town. He knew which drive-thrus had staff that wouldn't stare. He knew which times of night were quietest. He wasn't eating for taste anymore. He was eating to feel full of something, anything, but nothing satisfied. Not the fries, not the cake, not the fifth soda, because the hunger inside him wasn't in his stomach. It was in his soul. and no meal could silence that ache. It was past midnight. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts sound louder. He tiptoed to the kitchen like he always did, opened the fridge, stared at the leftovers, then closed it. Something was different that night. He wasn't hungry, not for food. He walked past his bedroom and locked himself in the bathroom, sat on the cold tile floor, hugging his knees to his chest like a child who just wanted to disappear. And then he broke. The kind of crying that comes from years of holding it all in. The kind that doesn't care about dignity. The kind where your chest hurts more than your eyes. He whispered through the sobs, "God, do you see me? Do I even matter?" No thunder. No lightning, just silence. But somehow, even in the silence, he didn't feel completely alone. He didn't go to the doctor often. But that day, his chest had been tight for 3 nights in a row. He couldn't breathe right, couldn't sleep. So he went. They weighed him, took his blood, ran tests. The doctor walked in holding a clipboard, but what he carried was heavier than numbers. "You're 17, but your body is fighting like it's 60. Your blood pressure is dangerous. Your heart's under constant stress." Then the words that echoed like a funeral bell. "If something doesn't change, you may not make it past 25. He smiled politely, nodded, but on the inside, he was already sinking. The doctor left the room, and in the silence, he stared at the wall. "Is this it?" he whispered. "Is this all I'll ever be? A statistic, a tragedy in the making, a body breaking before it even learned to live." That night, the house was dark. But darker still was the weight pressing on his chest, not from fat, not from sickness, but from hopelessness. He sat on the edge of his bed, holding his phone, scrolling, watching others live the life he thought he'd never have. Thin bodies, happy couples, laughter, light. He turned off the screen, and everything inside him turned off too. God, if I'm just going to live like this, unseen, unloved, unworthy, then don't let me wake up tomorrow. Silence. No angel appeared. No voice from heaven, just the sound of the ceiling fan spinning like time, slowly, pointlessly. He laid down, fully dressed, facing the wall, and as his eyes closed, one final thought came. If you still have something for me, you're gonna have to show me, because I don't believe it anymore. He woke up, not because he wanted to, but because breath still filled his lungs, and that alone was a mystery. He laid still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. Then he felt it. Not a voice in the room, not a sound in his ears, but something inside him, a whisper, soft, gentle, but heavier than anything he'd ever felt. You are not a mistake. You were never meant to be invisible. I see you. His heart raced, not from fear, but from something he hadn't felt in years, being known. He sat up, looked around, no one there. But something was different. The shame didn't leave. The weight didn't disappear. But suddenly, it didn't feel like he was carrying it alone. That night, something felt different. He didn't cry before bed. He didn't beg for death. He simply laid down in stillness. And that's when it came. The dream. He was standing on a stage in front of hundreds, maybe thousands. But they weren't laughing. They were listening, crying, receiving. He wasn't thin, he wasn't famous. But he was powerful, not in body, but in spirit. Then, in the dream, a hand touched his shoulder. And a voice, not angry, not soft, holy. I chose you. Before they mocked you, before you hated yourself, I called you by name. He turned around in the dream, but the face of the one speaking was light itself. And then he woke up, breathing hard, sweating, but smiling. For the first time, He woke up with hope. The dream haunted him in a good way. He couldn't forget the feeling, the words, that voice calling him by name. So he did something wild, something no one expected, least of all himself. He grabbed his old phone, sat on the edge of his bed, pressed record, and he spoke not like a preacher, not like a victim, but like a broken man with just enough faith to try. He talked about pain, about hiding, about hating mirrors, about that one whisper from God that said, "You are not a mistake." Then he uploaded it, heart racing, hands sweating, hoping someone, anyone, would hear him. He checked it an hour later, no views, 2 hours, nothing. By the next day, 3 views, 2 dislikes, and 1 comment. Bro, nobody cares. Go eat something. He stared at the screen, silent, numb, crushed. But then a thought came, quiet as breath. You obeyed. That's enough for today. And with that, he didn't delete the video. He just kept going. It had been weeks since that first video, still barely any views, still no likes, still whispers of doubt crawling back into his mind. But one morning, something shifted. He woke up early, earlier than usual, not because of an alarm, but because of a fire in his chest, a need to speak. He set up the phone again, but this time it wasn't just him talking. He didn't use notes, didn't rehearse, didn't even think. Words poured out, tears streamed down his face, and the voice coming from his own mouth sounded nothing like the boy who used to cry in the bathroom. You are not the names they gave you. You are not what broke you. You are God's handiwork, a walking testimony in progress. He posted the video and forgot about it, went to bed, exhausted. When he woke up, 25,000 views, thousands of comments, people saying, I felt this in my soul. You just saved my life. I thought I was alone. And in that moment, he knew. It wasn't just a video. It was a voice from heaven using his story to touch others. The boy who once begged to disappear had become the mouthpiece of hope for thousands. It didn't stop with one video. It became a wave. Every time he spoke, more people listened, not because he was eloquent, not because he was famous, but because he was real, raw, unfiltered, broken but bold. People from across the world began to comment. I haven't stepped in church in years, but your voice brought me back to God. You made me believe again. I watched your video with tears falling on my keyboard. He received DMs from teenagers on the edge, single mums holding on by a thread, even pastors asking him how he found that kind of fire. And every time he responded, he said the same thing. I didn't find it. It found me when I had nothing left to lose. He never expected to be a leader, never dreamed of helping anyone. But his deepest wound became the key to someone else's healing. And for the first time in his life, he felt something bigger than acceptance. He felt purpose. Years passed. He never lost all the weight. He still had stretch marks, still heard whispers behind his back sometimes. But he no longer lived for their approval, because he knew he was chosen. He stood on platforms he once only saw in dreams, preached in places that once mocked him, prayed for people who looked nothing like him, but cried the same tears he once held inside. Then, one day, it came full circle. He was invited to speak at a school, his old school. He walked through the same halls where they laughed at him, where they pointed, where he nearly gave up. But this time, they stood in silence. They leaned in. Some wept. And after the speech, a young boy, overweight, nervous, walked up and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up, because now I won't either." That night, as he looked at himself in the mirror, he didn't look away. For the first time, he saw a man anointed. "They laughed at me," he said, But God had the final word, because the stone the world rejected became the cornerstone of a movement.